was interesting before we started streaming. So unfortunately, we'll have to recap how she kicked us off. But Facebook versus Reddit, talking about whistleblowing, data science, social science, and everything else that I think by and large we already knew. Justin, would you like to kick us off with the entertaining tangent that you were starting on at 7 a.m.?
Which entertaining tangent was I banned from speaking? About the Facebook whistleblower?
Yeah, the convenient timing of the first global outage.
The outage. Yeah, so the documents from Frances Haugen started leaking like a while ago, right? Like the Wall Street Journal has been reporting on how Facebook and its other companies like WhatsApp and Instagram have known that they're horrible for a really long time. Would have been covering it up, and they've even made they made some changes to their algorithms to make themselves better for the election, and then changed it back after the election. So like they not only knew that they were doing things in a bad way, they also knew how to fix it and would do it when it was politically expedient for them. And so this news comes out. She's going to do a live interview on 60 Minutes, right? One of the biggest places for interviews on Earth. And then she at the same time, it comes out that over 1 billion Facebook users' data is now for sale on the dark web. And like right as all of that news breaks, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, three of the largest communication tools on the planet, just conveniently go down because of what they're saying is effectively like an issue with how the internet knows what Facebook.com is. And so because they're having this issue so that the computers can't talk to each other and understand that, what you type in your web browser means, this specific server path on the internet, everything went down for 6 straight hours. And it's the most conveniently timed outage in social media history since Tulsi Gabbard's Google account got shut down after taking down Kamala Harris in the Democratic primary debates. It's just so incredibly suspiciously timed that it just breeds conspiracy thinking. Particularly for a company where the main point of the documents that are out there is like, yeah, these guys will do anything to keep themselves looking good. And it's like, yeah, well, here we go. And so it raises a question of like, was this outage a deliberate mistake? Or was it an honest mistake that just happened to be at the most perfect timing?
What would be the benefit if it were intentional? I mean, I feel like that's an obvious one. I'm curious to hear your answer.
Yeah, so on social media, pretty much it's not even the first 2 days of news, right? It's social media moves so fast. It's the first 6 hours of news is really critical for how viral something will go. So if you look at sort of the viral curve of how many hits, clicks, likes, upvotes, etc. that you're going to get, it pops up really quickly in the beginning, and then it starts to tail down, and then it has a second bump, right? It looks like a pump and dunk penny stock, basically, when something goes viral, because you have that initial wave that goes way up. Now, the height of that initial wave is basically determined in the first 6 hours. Even if you're going to keep going viral for a day or maybe 2 or 3 days even, that first 6 hours really mandates how far up that wave is going to go. So if you shut down communication on a topic for the first 6 hours, you're basically going to make that wave go, you're going to have it go down like this, and you're not going to get that first wave, you're only going to get the second wave, and that second wave is much smaller than the first. So you basically, you flatten the curve, unlike anything we've ever done before on this planet, by shutting down Facebook for the first 6 hours. I mean, and you also see that, TED Talk, but we also have counterexamples, right? Like when you look at how there was a media blackout on talking about Hunter Biden's laptop during the last election, right? That's typically something that in the news cycle would have gone nuts. But the social media companies said, you can't talk about that, and we're going to either shadow ban those posts, that is to say, we're going to let you post it, but we're not going to promote it or put it on anyone's newsfeed, or they would just straight up tell you, you can't post this, we're considering this misinformation. Now, we know now that that's not true. It was 100% legitimate information. There's an entire FBI investigation about this. But that's like an example of like what happens when something doesn't go viral. Like the national conversation about that is restarting now, but now it restarts with conspiracy baggage, right? And this is kind of the dangerous byproduct, I think, to
It's a new one.
the fact that it shut down, regardless of whether or not it was intentional.
Do you get started?
Is that
Or
now
look
when
at-
we
look
have
at
this
these purple
conversation,
boxes here, you're gonna see
anyone
an
looking at
entire-
it is
every
going,
90
well,
seconds,
that was
chat in the comments, the
conveniently
people hanging out here are really
timed.
nice. You can make friends with
And,
them,
you
follow
know,
them.
when you
They
go
also
through the
stream.
document, it's like, all right, well, let's see,
I
is there any
suggest that you
evidence
hang
that
out in
Facebook
different
would do
streams and find
something
ones
to
that you
keep
like.
itself looking good publicly
Follow
because
them,
it knows that
support
it's
them.
doing something
Get the
bad
purple
in the
boxes. Right now
background?
there's a challenge
And then
going
you
on.
look
can
at
help
Frances Haugen's
people with their
whistleblowing leak
challenges.
on Facebook and Instagram, and you go, oh, that's pretty much all this is. And so it really kind of opens up that question and makes it seem a little less conspiratorial and a little less of a convenience and much more of just another move in the playbook.
What do you think the benefit is to coming to a public agreement that that's what happened?
So I think there's probably, so it depends on whether or not it's true. Actually, is I think where is the bottom line. If we come to a public agreement about it, and
Oh,
it
good
is
job, Pikachu.
true, then
Thank you
it
for
means that
supporting
there's,
me.
I think, enough consensus around such a critical issue, and saying like, look, you guys can't even you mishandling with the same mechanism. Like there's such an endemic, there's like a culture of cover up at Facebook and saying, look, we know we're doing bad, but we're going to keep this smiley face and say, oh no, we're doing good. Or, you know, anytime you're cornered, you go like, anytime you're cornered, you just go, oh, I don't recall, or I'll have to get back to you on that, Senator. And that's not something that's going to keep flying if the general public gets fed up. Now, if we come to the consensus that, look, this happened deliberately, you're covering up, you know, the whistleblowing of your cover-ups, and it's true, then I think that there might be an even larger movement to
Congrats on
keep
reaching
going
level
and
2.
you know, the sort of hashtag delete Facebook movement, which is, you know, they've had this issue for years, right? 2017
Hey, coffee
was their
man,
peak
welcome in.
user base.
My name's Elise.
So I think that that's part of it. However, if we're wrong, right? If Facebook didn't do this deliberately, and we're going from you know, having Facebook sort of covering all this up, and it's more of a conspiracy, then I think that what it does is it breeds mistrust in Facebook. Which at this point, though, again, because of the documents that have been released, that's not exactly the most unhealthy thing as far as misinformation goes online for us to believe in. It has the natural byproduct of us potentially adjusting some of those key issues anyways. Really, the only person I think that stands to lose by the general public having the consensus that this was deliberate is Facebook, which is a risk that Facebook has repeatedly been willing to take.
Yeah. It smells a lot like gaslighting. Like
Thank you, Pikachu.
change the dynamics of, instead of it being, you know, a person in an abusive relationship where one person is gaslighting the other and leading them to believe that they're crazy, it's happening at an organizational and societal level. So I mean, typically I believe it's generally advised by therapists, I have personal experience, to leave those relationships. But it's kind of interesting in, you know, breaking up with Facebook. It is legitimately hard because you're not only breaking up with the platform, but you're breaking up with all of the value that it does have in the connections. Yeah, and I've been looking at how to replace it, like how
The
to find
perceived value in those connections is something that I would note. So I broke up with Facebook a while ago, after at one point being a heavy user and actually managing like accounts for organizations and these sorts of things. I was a very heavy user of Facebook for many years. And one of the things that you realize when you do break up from Facebook, or when you take a break from Facebook, as a lot of people do, is how much value there really is in all those connections, and how much you're not actually having participatory conversations with real people. They're real people that you have met, but they are not people that you have close relationships with. Just because you like everything that they post and they like everything that you post, that's not a conversation. That's not real friendship. And the fact that we perceive it as such is one of the most dangerous parts of the modern world. So, like, yeah, I do. I see the thumbs up, and like honestly, it's a hard thing to face. And I had people that I like, even family members, right, who I was communicating with regularly on Facebook. And I had some friends that I've known for years that I was communicating with on Facebook and stuff. And it was like, a lot of funny jokes going around and stuff like that. But when I left Facebook, I realized that once it's just this one-on-one conversation, right? Because we'd move it to WhatsApp or Signal or something like that. That one-on-one conversation, it dies out so quickly that you realize that you're not as close with that person unless they can do the dance in public. So they don't want to dance with you in private, and that's one of the issues of Facebook friends. They're not actually your friends. Your friends are friends with you in private.
Interesting. So the thing that has been, and this is less about the data and the science of Facebook, it's more about me being, a retired growth hacker and still being enjoying fuckery. So what I really want to do, and I think I've mentioned this before, is create an exit interview. Because every person, and I this is the one reason I haven't deleted Facebook yet, is because I want to make my best attempt at creating a viral trend of deleting Facebook. Like, if I can take a bunch of people with me, I'm happy. And so what I've kind of been thinking is, like, I'm going to make a type form or like a survey and just ask questions and say, hey, like, when we got into this relationship of being, friends, our belief system of what the label friend meant is different than what we know it to be now. And I'd like to unfriend you and reconnect. And so it's basically an exit interview to keep it light. I'm trying not to go into like the heady, like, techno-authoritarianism and all that jazz, and just like keep it light. And then basically ask that question and say, look, like, do you want to see pictures of my food? Okay, cool. Like, here's a Google, album that'll update stuff with occasionally.
The number of
go here. Yeah,
the number of friends who like don't know the name of my wife, or don't know if I have kids, or how many kids I might have, or what their names are, is pretty telling, I think, of what a Facebook friend is. Like, my wife and I have made a very deliberate decision. We do not put pictures of our son on social media. And so because of that, a lot of people, I've actually heard them say, what, you have a kid? I didn't know you had a kid. And so that was like, that's part of it.
Why don't you take, what you should do is you should take like, and this is me, but I'm not having kids anytime soon, so please do this on my behalf. I'm just thinking of like, you should go get a little doll and dress it up or like an atom-sized doll, and be like, this is not my son, but this is a representation of my son.
Yeah. Maybe I will.
And you make a social proxy, and then basically you just like everything that Adam does, you just take a picture of the doll and Adam's clothes.
That's an interesting idea.
I would, but I just finished watching The Haunting at Bly Manor, and there are going to be no child-sized dolls in my house. I can guarantee that. Especially not doing like childlike things, like sitting around playing the piano or something. I'm going to turn around from my desk, have some doll playing the piano. I'm going to die. I'm just going to I'm done. And then I will haunt my apartment in Bratislava.
Well, the thing, I also am questioning, like, where, if you look at Daniel Kahneman's, I think it's Daniel Kahneman, of The Power of Habit, and how you replace a habit is that you have a trigger, a routine, and a reward. And you can't just turn it off. You're always going to have the trigger. You can't just turn off you can't turn off the routine because your brain and your body wants the reward. So what the science says is you replace the routine. Yeah. And so the question is like, what?
Bye.
back.
What's the routine to replace with? How do we make more resonant connections in a post-Facebook world?
Join a club. Like, I know it sounds super boring, right? But the biggest issue with people who have addictions, right? And social media is very much an addiction. The biggest issue with people who have addiction is they replace it with an addiction. Find like one alcoholic or like ex-cokehead that you know that doesn't chain smoke. Like everybody I know who suffered from a drug addiction in particular, all of them smoke like chimneys. And they're just like, and they all know it's bad for them, but they will look you dead in the face. And if they've been sober a while and they're comfortable talking about it, they'll look you dead in the face and they'll be like, I would rather die of this than die of cocaine. Like, they're like, it's just the thing, right? Like, you replace your addiction with another addiction. And with social media, it's difficult because you get off Facebook and then you're just addicted to Twitter, right? One of the things that I think is the issue is like, the basis of these social networks is they start with an echo chamber of one and then move up from there. With Reddit, at least there's a community, right? So if you're participating a lot on Reddit, you're participating in a community discussion where your ego is not the centerpiece, right? The topic is the centerpiece, and you and all these other people who you really don't know, right? There's no feigning, I think, of friendship on Reddit, which is something that's important. Like, you know where you stand with, like, Peter Griffin 69. You know, like, you don't know that guy. His name is Peter Griffin 69. Like, his name's obviously Josh. But, like
I feel personally attacked.
I feel personally attacked. Too close. Like, you know, you go on to Wall Street Bets. Those guys, they're not friends, but they're having a good time with each other nonetheless, right? So there's a different dynamic because, you know, nobody cares who you are. And that, I think, is great because it's honest on social media. The way that you replace it, though, is you have meaningful real-world relationships, right? Go out to a pub, like go out to a restaurant, join a bowling club. You know, they've been looking at this since the 1980s, right? Social media has put a rocket ship under the bowling alone effect, which has been documented sociologically in the United States and other places for decades, which is that civic participation. Yeah, so Bowling Alone is the title of a book that was written many moons ago by a sociologist who was studying this idea of, like, has participation in, like, neighborhood groups gone down over the years? And he found that overwhelmingly the answer is yes, but there's a lot of really weird side effects of this. And, you know, the biggest one was bowling clubs, is that a lot of people still enjoyed bowling, but they weren't participating in bowling leagues or bowling clubs at the same rate that they were anymore. So we called it Bowling Alone. And in a way, right, that like perceived loneliness, it worked its way into I think the double side of Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine, right? Is that the loneliness is creating this anomie, as they say in sociology or in French. But a French sociologist, Emile Durkheim, came up with this, which is this, that, you know, you start to break down when you just stop giving a fuck. And having clubs and religious organizations and churches, and even non-religious religious organizations, right? Like atheist groups are healthy for people to join, right? There's a lot of mental health benefits for being in a religious group that do not happen if you are religious and not in a group. Right? And so the funny thing is those same benefits you get if you are not religious and in a group, right? So even if you're atheist and you go to atheist meetings, you're still getting the same mental health benefits as a Christian going to church or a Muslim going to mosque. Yeah, because it's a mechanism for social connection. So, you know, having organizations that are offline are really healthy to balance. Online, like, that's one of the things I love about Meetup. Right? Meetup's entire purpose is just to facilitate your actual meeting. And I think that's a very healthy place, and that's a thing that we should try and reposition our social media for, because the other thing that does is it does help combat the extremism tendencies of social media, because it's easy to be extremist in your basement. like with the lights off and nobody knows who you are, Peter Griffin 69. But it's really difficult to be an extremist asshole in public because it hurts your actual reputation as a person. And when you're around a bunch of other people and they're looking at you like, that dude's an asshole, you don't get likes and upvotes for being an asshole in real life. And that has a really big effect on how it changes. So if your group of people that you hang out with in real life are the same group of people you hang out with online, it's going to have an effect of being a much more happy place to engage with people online. And I think that's one of the big issues with like Facebook and Instagram in particular, but not so much WhatsApp, right? WhatsApp is this one-to-one situation. We got to have somebody's phone number, so it's, you got to have that connection with them at least. But like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, these systems are set up for you to connect with as many people as possible.
And speaking personally, I actually find Topia it's not face-to-face, obviously, but something about the spatial movement, it affects me. Like I feel, like if I start moving away or like it feels like we're in a kind of space that we're moving. So at least it gets closer to real world social connection.
Nice to meet you. My name's Elise.
It simulates it really well, right? Because you accidentally click somewhere and you start walking away from people. Everyone has the same reaction. They all go, no. And they even fade, like your video fades. They all do the same thing. Like when you walk away accidentally on the platform, no. And I think that's the natural psychological reaction of if you turn around and look and your group kept walking down the street and has left you behind, you're like, oh no, shit, like let me speed up and catch back up with my people. And so it gives you a little bit of a tribe, even if only temporarily. But that temporary tribe is actually really palpable, right? They're experimental effects. There's an entire method in psychology called the minimal group paradigm, where just by walking in and telling someone they're in the blue group or the red group, you automatically start to get in-group effects. And you can do this anywhere at any time with anybody.
Can we do it on Topia? Can we have an entire party where we just tell people, as they enter, you're in the blue group?
I'm purple.
Oh, yeah.
Am I purple?
Yeah, you'll start to get people...
I'm the only orange I'm the token orange guy here.
It's a party. I'm dancing.
That's right. Here we go. Some dance.
Hey, I'd be curious to hear the numbers of downloads of TikTok on the day of the outage, because that day and the following day, all of the theme, not all of it, but a good theme of a lot of the videos was about that. Like how there's a wave of newbies on TikTok and they're coming from Facebook. But that's just something interesting. But Brian, I did want to ask you about what you felt about the live streaming app that you experimented with last month.
Which one? Pococha?
Pococha, yeah. What do you think about that and the kind of space forming, kind of dynamics that it has?
It was delightful and weird, but it felt like it overlapped with something that I already had, and I couldn't quite place it. It was partly honestly RPAN, right? I think streaming to RPAN is more my speed. I don't know, it's more nerdy maybe. Pococha was cutesy, and it was very, very Asian, which I it just wasn't, I don't know, maybe late at night when I was just delirious and needed to go to sleep. I was I'm drawing hearts on sticky notes and constant repetitive action. And I'm oh, this is kind of fun, but I never streamed again. That was the only time I ever did it. And I had it on my phone for a while and I kept looking at it. I'm I should do it again. But it didn't have enough depth to bring me back, I guess is the most succinct way I could say it. Because the depth of interactions was it called me to presence very quickly, because it was fast interaction, but the interaction that was had was very.
What if we, Brian? And Elise and Justin, what if we thought in terms of emotional energy? Durkheim and some more modern sociologists talk about the emotional energy we get, or Durkheim used the phrase effervescence. When people get together in a group, at least for intense feasts or rituals. There's this kind of emotional energy that bubbles up and gives the group a sense of its identity. But Kevin, who I thought might be here, I was telling you about him, the sociologist, he and I have been talking about the experience of, most of us don't live in small scale societies with shamans doing rituals and ecstatic naked dancing, but so our effervescence or our emotional energy, we have to get in other ways, and it kind of distributed rather than a collective way. So like, just to go back to Elisa's question, when you engaged in that app versus others, do you feel a sense of emotional energy or not, and might that influence your enjoyment of it or your participation in it?
Elise, you're muted if you're answering.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's why it's not your style. So that's like, I think there's going to be different platforms and different styles, the actual, UI, but like the intention of live streaming in general, not specifically one app or another, because all the apps are completely different in how they encourage interaction. But ultimately, the channels and the streams that are actually like having regular viewers and the dynamics that are created in those channels are what you're talking about, Laurent. It's like a shared context. It's a shared set of values, a shared lifestyle. And, it just depends on the app where these communities are getting formed. But it's just live streaming in general, same as RPAN or as Twitch, is just like really cool, and how it creates this like deeper community more than just, oh, we like these kind of photos together. Even Discord is kind of superficial in that, but like that's even better than a Facebook. But like to have an actual like video and like this community that arrives day after day, and like their relationships become stronger and stronger. And I've started to meet people that I met online. Like when I went to Europe, I just did like a crazy like 2-week trip to like 7 different countries, and I met a bunch of people from my live streaming. And it's like the second you meet each other, even if you don't even have many like email interactions or like personal interactions outside of the public space of communication, it's just like you've known each other forever. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. I've had like people that Laurent and I have worked with where it's like that, where we'll connect with each other somehow on the interwebs over a mutual interest. Like one of us will have written something that the other one has read, and we'll be like, oh, hey, I'm also studying, extremism, or I'm also interested in AI and simulation. We start, sending nerdy emails back and forth to each other. That sort of academic flirting of like, maybe you'll co-author with me. And right, yeah, I like it too. It just came to me. And it's interesting, then when you actually meet each other, like at a conference or something like that, it's like, you hit it off, and it's almost weird because you're like, wait, we've never actually met before.
Yeah, but it feels like you know them, and this is why, like, this is related to our.
One of my closest friends at the in Bratislava actually is exactly like that. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. It's like this related to our overarching theme of this series that we do every other week, the practicing safe sex. Like we need sex. SECTS. We need to live together. We need, and one of the reasons is I think we get emotional energy. It keeps us effervescent. It keeps us feeling alive and open and connected. But and these, as Justin was saying earlier, these you need face-to-face connection too. But in some ways, at least some of the social media apps and sites can facilitate some emotional energy. But then the question is, when does that emotional energy shift to become in-group, out-group? And my experience of Reddit is it does so less so than Facebook. It gives emotional energy, but in a way that is less likely to lead to polarization.
It's
so. Justin, you talked about the science behind what Laurent just said. So. And someone, Krager14, if I'm saying that correctly, said, I deleted all of my social media besides this. And my response was, scientifically speaking, that was for the best, because Reddit is one of the least damaging platforms for your mental health. And Justin, you had a ranking that it was based on data, I believe.
We did a study with Kingston University
with geniuses.
where it's not published out yet. But we did this
Practicing
with our
safe
friend
sex.
Josh Bullock in the sociology department there, and we were looking at like what the effects of social media use are on a wide range of like kind of negative consequences in the 2020-2021 like news cycle, right? So we were looking at like vaccine hesitancy, we were looking at misinformation, conspiracy beliefs. We were also looking at like
I'm also
nationalism
interacting with
and
this conversation. I'm just muted right
racism,
now, so I can talk to you.
anti-immigrant stances, all sorts of
If you
things.
have a question,
And effectively, yeah,
put it
the
in.
general
I'll ask the
takeaway was that
geniuses.
Reddit is on the whole,
Pikachu.
Reddit is the best. Like it had the least
Pikachu
negative
hurts my
effects
brain.
of all
Oh,
of them.
Jim.
Um,
Sorry.
Twitter and Instagram really stood out as having like significant negative effects. And then there was like a lot of interesting ones too, because we did something weird in that study because we wanted to look at vaccine hesitancy. And so we put a couple of vaccines, we asked people about vaccines that didn't exist. We made them up. One of them was like, was it Novavax?
No.
Theranos was the other one. So we used Theranos and
yeah,
we said
I remember that
Theranos created a vaccine. And then the other one, I think we called it Novavax. Or is that an
Twitch is
actual
good too.
like weirdo one? Anyway, so we did that, and then we did
Love how you
the
can't remember
Chinese.
which ones you faked for the study.
Yeah, I know Theranos was one of them because I thought that would be fun to see. And then we also put in the Sputnik Russian vaccine and Sinovac, the Chinese made vaccine, and tried to look at what the effects were. And what we found was interesting is that people in the United Kingdom will take the Oxford
Jim, are you
AstraZeneca
watching
vaccine
Twitch?
at the highest
Are you on
rate,
the
even
Twitch
though
stream?
it had the
Check.
most side effects.
Hmm.
And they knew they were, they said they had the most information about that vaccine, which was overwhelmingly negative during the time of the
Hey, you're not
study,
there. Why
because
aren't
they
you
were
on
talking
Twitch?
about all of the like heart issues and all of these things, and they were really blown out of
Yes,
proportion. To
rocking
be
the
honest with
sweater. He's
you,
cool.
the rate of like medical issues coming from the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine for things like blood clotting are lower than the rates of blood clotting in women using birth control. Right? And birth control, fine in the United Kingdom. Everybody's doing it. But the rates were even lower than birth control, but they're like, stop the vaccine.
I
No
do
one ever said
stream
stop the birth control,
by
mind
here.
you, which,
Check
Safe
out
sex.
my-
the whole tangent on that one, that we can go down.
my channel.
About how, we have a
I'm live
pill
right
that
now.
cures
You can
polio,
watch
but
it.
that's
It's
not the
kinda cool.
pill.
You can actually see the guys that are talking.
And so
I can't
we
stream
thought this
it
was
on
interesting
Vocal
that
Chat,
Oxford
but
was
we
the
can listen
highest,
to it
and then the
together.
other ones, and then the fake vaccines, and then the Russian and Chinese vaccines. So people are more willing to take a vaccine they've never heard of and know nothing about than a Russian or Chinese vaccine. And a lot of it is just, it's all about trust and distrust. And if you don't have trust, you won't take it. Now, name an industry that has been more distrusted for the last 30 years than pharmaceuticals. And Congress doesn't count. You can't find one. If social media existed for 30 years, maybe that one. But that becomes part of it.
Oil.
I mean, on the one hand, yeah, they've got bad reputations, but you still don't mind putting Exxon in your car. But people will put those vaccines in their body, right? People will smoke, from time to time, no
Angry
problem.
baby.
Like, they have very
Pikachu.
bad reputations from things that have happened in the past, but people are still using it. They're not like protesting the very use of cigarettes. If anything, there's more outrage about the fact that e-cigarettes are now banned for people, what is it, under 21? Is that what they did in the US? You can't smoke unless you're 21 now, or some ridiculous stuff like this. Like, in France, they start smoking at like 8 and they're fine. But so there's this whole issue of trust. And what was interesting is that the proportionality of these effects had to do with the frequency of your social media use. But generally across the board, Reddit was not
All right,
affecting
Jay, got it.
these issues.
So double click on that. So the sway of your bias was affected by the frequency of your social media use. Am I saying that correctly?
So yeah, that there you could find that in the data, but the more I've dug into the data, the more it seems like it's not the sway of your bias, it's the intensity of your bias. Because there are people who are going far on either direction on most social media platforms, on Facebook and Twitter in particular, right? They're effectively just echo chamber machines. So it's not the sway of your bias; it's the intensity of it, because you're gonna float up here, and then eventually you're gonna drop down into one of the echo chambers, and there's at least two, and then the intensity of that bias is going to become even more. It's very hard to stay here in Facebook and Twitter, particularly Twitter, because Twitter, if you don't bend the knee to whatever you need to bend the knee to that week, they're just going to start harassing you on Twitter until you either delete your account or apologize or do whatever it is you need to do. Facebook, it's a little more forgiving because they seem to have less of a pile-on effect, I think. And I think it's because not everything is always public on Facebook.
Grumpy Loser said, "Where banana?" And a banana appeared.
Grumpy Loser. I would love to know what his real name is.
How do you assume that it's a he?
That's true.
Gendering the grumps.
I did, which technically,
women and transgender people can't be grumpy.
Oh, they can. I'm married, Brian. They get grumpy sometimes.
Thanks for the biggest.
Also, statistically,
Grumpy Loser now said noise, and then said, "Where $10 billion?"
I'm on his team. We get some equity in that request, Grumpy.
It's okay, Midtown.
Also, one of the interesting things that we found out about these Facebook leaks, right, is that the negative mental health consequences, particularly of Instagram, are disproportionately affecting women, particularly young women.
You like the Facebook nerds.
So if you feel like you're a grumpy loser, statistically, you're more likely to be female on social media. So my gendered assumptions of, I guess, what I assume to be a grumpy old man, the data shows that that's actually less likely. But what I thought was very damning in the report on Facebook in particular is that they studied this, right? They brought in their top psychologists who get paid buttloads of money to study mental health on Instagram, saw that it was disproportionately negative for young girls, and went, you know what we should do?
Oh, you mean
we should release an app for the youth. And just, like, they looked at the science and they just said, you know what? Fuck that. Let's just keep banging down this horrible trail that we've created for ourselves. And they didn't try and adjust Instagram to address the fact that they're basically the most body image destroying thing since magazine covers for young women, and kept going along with this. And then they were going to release an app specifically for kids. And it's like, under what circumstances do you think that's a good idea? Also, at least I found numbers to the answer of your question. According to Censor Tower, the average time spent on Snapchat during the outage jumped 23%. On Twitter, it jumped 11%. And on TikTok, it jumped by 2%.
Oh, wow.
Huh. Wait, first of all, how did you find that data?
Censor Tower.
Interesting.
That's as reported on TechCrunch.
So what were those numbers again? What do they mean?
So the time spent on apps during the social media outage jumped positively on October the 4th for Snapchat, Telegram, Signal, Twitter, and TikTok, and obviously went down like insane amounts on Messenger, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram because the outage did that. So week over week growth.
So the fact that TikTok didn't grow that much, like one possible interpretation there would be that TikTok users aren't using Facebook anyway. They're younger. No. Yeah. So it wouldn't.
They're a much younger demographic. So one of the other things, right, about any alternative app, which TikTok still, I would say, qualifies as an alternative app. Signal would as well, I would say, is that typically its user base is kind of, they all share something in common demographically or from a belief perspective, right? Like Parler was very attractive to people who had been kicked off of Twitter. Gab, again, attractive for people whose political views got them kicked off of Twitter or Facebook. So they birds of a feather tend to flock together, and the birds of TikTok are a very, they're a much younger crowd. There's like a very key thing, and the way that platform is set up is that. So I'm not surprised. I'm kind of surprised it was only 2% because you seem to see TikTok everywhere. But yeah, Snapchat 23%, Telegram jumped 18%, Signal jumped 15%, Twitter jumped 11%, and TikTok jumped 2%. So yeah, so that's definitely an interesting one. Now the question I think though is how many
my name's Elise.
How much of that is going to be long term, right? How many of those people are like, yeah, well, I'm using Signal now instead of WhatsApp, and they're like done with WhatsApp. They're like, yeah, whatever. All my people talk on Signal now. I don't think that they were able to transfer their entire network of conversations over to Signal that quickly. So I don't know that there's going to be like long-term effects for like user bases on Facebook. I think the long-term detrimental effects on the Facebook apps are going to come from a growing distrust on the platform. People feeling like, that there's too much going on behind the scenes. The other thing being that like the VIP list,
really? Oh my gosh,
Zuckerberg has always said, everyone is sort of censored at the same rate, has been this thing that he keeps saying. And everyone kind of knows that's not true. And then it came out that they actually have like built into their platform like a flag on accounts that basically allow you to do whatever you want, and that there's certain VIP users that are given immunity on the platform to do whatever they want, and those people are not censored through the same regimes
if you have any questions
as others. So
doesn't that in itself violate what's the 409 or the
203?
Thank you. Yeah.
Arguably, yeah. I mean, the whole issue around the legislation on that was written for a time before today, right? It's like how the SEC tries to regulate cryptocurrency. These laws were written before the technology existed, so the laws arguably don't really apply very well. And so this has to do with the idea that Facebook is not a software so much as it is a news outlet. And if it's a news outlet, it has to provide certain balance. Otherwise, it has editorial power effectively. And so there are people saying, Facebook it's not being an editor of the news. It's not curating the news. It's allowing other people to share the news, and we can't be held responsible for what they do. But the fact is that if you have censorship power over your network, you are a curator. You are censoring the news. You are exercising editorial control over what's shared and what's discussed on your platform. It's basically like if the New York Times hired billions of very shitty writers and then said, we're going to fire or lay you off if you don't write something well, or if you don't write something, or if you write something we don't like. We're gonna lay you off for a week or two, or maybe we'll fire you entirely. That's effectively what Facebook's censorship platform is doing. If you share news that we don't like or we've not approved of, at that point in time, we're going to cut you off. It doesn't mean that Facebook is not actually curating the news. It just means that they are really bad at it. And I think that's what they're hiding behind. They're saying that they're not doing it. The reason they're saying they're not doing it is not just because they're bad at it. They're saying they're not doing it because of the regulatory regime that would legally be imposed on Facebook if that were the case, right? If they are curating the news, if they are editorializing, they have to adhere by certain regulations, and that becomes one of the big issues for them. So I think that's their main motivation. They don't really care. They've already been editorializing everything, right? I mean, like, if the New York Post, right, the 5th most read newspaper in the United States, I think, one of the oldest standing news outlets in the United States, writes a report that, the vice president and, current running for president, likely to become president's son, has a laptop where he's smoking a bunch of crack and has been spending money on hookers and doing all these deals in China, like, that's a legitimate concern. So to say you can't talk about that news is by its very nature editorializing that news, right? And it was that you cannot share it, you cannot do it. And they did it under the guise of misinformation, but they had no reason to believe it was misinformation. They had every reason to believe that it was not misinformation, in fact. And yet they suppressed it anyways, and it turns out it was not misinformation. This is not like a lab leak theory kind of issue, right? Where at the time, the lab leak theory was generally there was a scientific consensus that it was implausible. The idea that a guy who has a history of drug use and, has already impregnated one sex worker, would possibly have evidence of doing those things, that's not like a lab leak theory conspiracy. That's just there's evidence of wrongdoing from a guy who we know to be doing wrong things. And so it was highly editorialized. And I think that's like one of the key differences, right? Is that there are instances of like news editorialization on Facebook.
Are there instances of, I'd be more curious to know where there's not editorialization, because even Reddit does it. A lot of times they do it on accident because they're the AI that does a lot of their like shadow bans and stuff like that is just terrible. I think my favorite one was I got suspended for 3 days because I doxed someone. And what I mean by that is I posted Brian Bot's phone number in my own fucking post, right? So it's my phone number that's designed to be public.
Your chat bot. Yeah.
Right. So I have a phone number for my AI. It's a public number. It's on my website. It's a public art experiment, right? It's the whole thing.
Thank you for the heart.
It's public. It's literally the header of my website. And I put it in the chat, and the AI was like, "You put a phone number here. You're suspended for 3 days."
People will just like the TikTok.
And the thing is that nowhere on the platform does it say that that's a rule that you cannot break, right? It's not a rule. And because it's not a rule, it's not a stated rule, then you get into this question of, okay, if it's not a stated rule that you're breaking, is that editorialization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, and I think that's part of the issue, right? Is that if the news is the news and we're supposed to, if it's an open platform, we should be able to discuss any news. And we should be able to discuss it in any way that we feel appropriate, that is to say, regardless of which side of a political spectrum, and to an extent, insofar as you are not promoting violence or anything like that, as far extreme on the left or right that you may be outside of those bounds, right, of inciting violence or hate or something like that, that should all be permissible. But the fact is that that's not permissible on Facebook as part of the issue. In some areas, you're not allowed to discuss the things at all. I think that when it comes to conspiracy theories, it's very weird that they censor conspiracy theories on Facebook. Why do they censor conspiracy theories, right? They say, oh, it's misinformation. It's things we know not to be true. It's like, well, the thing about a conspiracy theory is it's like a religion. It's non-falsifiable. You can never show it to not be true, right? There's always something that's not proven that is the thread that weaves all the nonsense together. So it's not that it's been shown not to be true. It's just that we all agree that this is so far-fetched nonsense that we don't want to participate in it. But banning conspiracy theory is a very weird thing to say, oh, that's misinformation, yet still allow for every religion on earth to still have a Facebook page, right? Because regardless of your own faith belief, if you are a believing Christian, you do not believe, you believe that Islam has misinformation in it, or Buddhism has misinformation in it. If you are a practicing, if you're a practicing Orthodox Jew, you believe that there's certain misinformation about Christianity. So who decides where that misinformation is when it comes to non-falsifiable statements like religion and conspiracy?
Justin. Yeah.
So if any religion is allowed to have it, and Zuckerberg is very promoting of religion, the first thing he wants to do in his new virtual reality metaverse project, right, is to start digitizing religions, which is the scariest thing I've heard in a long time. Can you imagine the guy who's created and fostered more extremism and polarization in the world going, you know what I need to deal with? Religion. There's never been an issue of extremism with religion that's ever had a negative impact on the world. I'm going to get involved there. It's like, look, dude, go the fuck home. Seriously, go home.
So let's
sleep it off.
Let's talk about going the fuck home, because Grumpy Loser said, once I wanted to reset my uncle's phone because he was actually getting into conspiracy theories. Is there any consensus on what happens to people after a reset? And the first thing that came to mind was consent, right? So what happens after a consensual reset? Like, hey, I'm really concerned about you. Like, would you be willing to do a social media diet with me, right? Consensual reset. Versus a non-consensual reset, which is, I've seen some awesome Reddit posts of like, kids like fucking with their boomer like Wi-Fi router settings so that they can't get to Fox News anymore. So like, is there any data on what?
Can't get into it, Alan.
What that looks like and how you can prompt people to create new patterns, either with their knowledge or without?
Laurent, you've been digging into some of this, haven't you?
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if I could help in terms of social media, but like in general, I think we touched on this a few weeks ago. Like, not sure if this will answer your question, Brian, but what the empirical research on getting people to move off of such ideological firmness, if you can put it that way, is first of all not to immediately and directly attack or challenge the idea itself, but rather to find a value that you connect with them. So one of my favorite studies was they did two groups of conservatives who were anti-gay, and then for one group they said so and so Josh, we'll say, is gay, and he should be treated fairly because everyone should have equal rights in America. And then the second group got Josh is gay and he wants to join the army because he loves America and he's patriotic and wants to serve his country. And so the conservatives in the first group, their attitude toward gays got worse. The second group, which shared the value of patriotism, they became more open to, less bias against gays. So if you can connect to a shared value, that automatically affects the brain to become more open. That's one example.
Yeah.
So what would be an example of a shared value with an uncle who's getting into conspiracy theories? Like, I share a value with you for finding the truth in things.
That might be one.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go that route.
I wouldn't either. No.
Yeah, right. Like, because the issue is that they've already made a boundary about what truth is in their conspiracy, and you're not likely going to share that. If you can find a hook there, cool. Go
so
with it.
It would depend on the conspiracy. Like one hook might be hook might be society. Society is falling apart, and we need a cohesive society.
If you've got questions, we're talking about Facebook, social media.
And that's most conspiracies now.
Yeah, of some sort.
That's a classic yarn that's woven in the conspiracy world.
Indeed.
Like, for example, I've got a family member who I'm fairly close with. Like, we talk even off of Facebook. Who is like a QAnon guy. He's into it. He thought that there was going to be this big overthrow, and he thought that they were going to sweep in and arrest everyone, Nancy Pelosi and everyone, all at the same time. And I was just like, who are these people? Who's coming? When? Like, trust me, that's not how this is going to work. And I, for a while I started being like, here's a reason that's wrong. Like, there's this whole idea of like, oh, the United States actually is an independent corporation. And I was like, no, that's not how the world works. This is not a thing. You're misunderstanding and misinterpreting a document like from 200 years ago, where a corporation was not meant in the same way. Like, the C Corp structure did not exist in the 1700s in the same legal framework that it does today. So first off, that. But at the same time, there's, and then it just gets further and further and further. And what you have to just kind of do is we know what happens when a prophecy fails. And when a prophecy fails, people don't go, oh shit, I was wrong. They start to evangelize harder because they couldn't possibly admit that they were wrong. But I knew that this particular family member he doesn't take kindly to being wrong. And if his belief showed me wrong, I immediately bet him. I said, look, I bet you, a dinner at a restaurant that I knew he and I both love in Maryland called the Suicide Bridge restaurant. I was like, look, I bet you dinner at Suicide Bridge that that this isn't happening, that this mass arrest isn't happening. Oh, it's gonna happen, dude. It's gonna happen. I bet you. Okay, let's see. And then after that happened, I was like, all right, got a dinner in the books, huh? And part of the reason I did that was to draw attention to the fact that that his belief was not going to hold up. And the reason I said is because the sources were not really reliable.
Get your boxes.
But the other thing is that I didn't want to challenge his beliefs in a way that would distance us. I wanted to challenge it in a way that would possibly bring us together. And that's why I said, look, you're going to have to buy me dinner. We're going to meet about this, in the real world. And then he had another, oh, well, this is going to happen now. And I was like, you going to throw another dinner down on this? And he said, yeah, this is 100% happened. And then it didn't happen. And then he went for a third time. I said, look, you trying to buy me out for a week at this point, man? Like where are you getting this information from? So, oh, well, there's this thing online. I was like, are you really believing anything you believe online? I was like, look, I agree with you. The United States is not in a good thing. And I played a sort of patriotism card. To try and connect and say, look, I also agree that we're in a state in the country that's not healthy. And as someone who is very, pro-America in the ideals of things like, liberty and justice and equality, that, we have to, that things do have to change. But we have to make those changes. And relying on some ethereal Q prophecy is not actually going to make those changes, nor... and he was also, very, he's very outraged by the media, and that was easy for me to make a contact point with, because I'm also outraged by the media. I think they're all full of nonsense. And, so being able to say, and kind of, cede some ground on things like what happened on January 6th, as, on the one hand, obviously being not good for the democracy, but also being obviously blown out of proportion by the media in a lot of ways, that was something where he could see that it wasn't that I was against him, it was an honest disagreement. And so it didn't kind of force him into this defensive, like, my prophecy has failed, I need to evangelize cognitive state. It was, okay, he and I are having a conversation about things we agree on, and then he can kind of say, look, okay, there is another way. So the idea is reframe those conspiracy beliefs. Some of those are going to get lost in the dust eventually. Otherwise, prophecies will continue to fail till the group breaks down, which is typically why long-lived cults don't keep making prophecies. And those that do will fizzle out. So if you look at cults where the cult leader was very young, when they took power over the group and they make prophecies, the group tends to fizzle out like within 10 years because they won't keep up with the prophecies. And this is very common amongst like New Age religious groups, because there's this like coming prophecy of a coming enlightenment. And the more they say this is the sign of the New Age enlightenment that's coming, and then when it never comes, eventually people go, oh, well, we didn't have enough people meditating. We didn't have enough people in our group. We didn't have enough believers. But at a certain point, they just get burnt out, because every time you do that, you have to ratchet it up further and further, because things are catchy when they slightly violate our expectations. But every time you violate the expectation, something gets a little weirder, right? And we know this exists everywhere in our minds and everywhere in culture, right? A dog is a dog, but a talking dog, now that's something. That's something that everyone's going to want to talk about, right? Like if Bitcoin starts talking to us right now, it's going to get weird.
Bitcoin's a dog, for the record.
Bitcoin is a dog. There's Bitcoin. And so he heard his name. He knows what's up. So when you have that, it's one thing. But then if you're like, look, it's a talking red dog. You're like, oh, right, all right, I'm still following. But there's only so many things that you can add on top of that talking, red dog that can go even further. So and you can even do this in real time, right? If you say that, there's a talking invisible blue dog that's spotted and lives time backwards. Brian, can you recite all of the different things that the dog has?
A talking invisible blue dog that lives time backwards.
Yeah. So if you can do that with 5, that's fine. But if you do that with 10, So if I start saying like talking invisible blue dog that lives times backwards, only lives in trees, comes out in full moons, like at a certain point you go, I just don't remember all of it. I can only remember some of it. And unless you have like a ritual structure where you're constantly repeating one of those attributes, like Jesus does nutty stuff, a lot of crazy stuff. Oh, he can turn water into wine. He's kind of immortal, but kind of not. He can come back from the dead. He can speak to the dead. He can heal the dead. He can heal the lepers. He can heal he can do all of these things. But a sermon doesn't list, all of them at once. A sermon hits 1 or 2 a week. And then over years and years of ritual, you build up this collective idea of this complex, crazy being, right? So you need to have that. Conspiracy theories don't have ritual structures usually. So it's very easy to drop off part of the conspiracy theory eventually because you don't have that real world ritual where you all come together and reaffirm X belief every week. And by the way, if you do it more or less than on average every 7 or 8 days, you lose the cognitive optimum that your mind needs to construct these elaborate schemas, right? So you have to have these rituals in order to keep this stuff going over time. And that's one of the big things about the conspiracy theories is you have to up it every time. The cult leader has to make the prophecy bigger. The conspiracy that's failed has to make itself a little more nutty in order to really catch on. And if it doesn't, it dies out. And if it does, eventually, it's still going to die out because it's going to take it to 11. And it can't support its own weight anymore, the weight of its own prophecies. So conspiracy theories are usually pretty short-lived. Like some of them are easy enough because you can state the conspiracy at once, right? Like for example, even though it's been around for decades, the moon landing conspiracy, this is my prophecy that you can write down. The moon landing conspiracy will outlive QAnon. And the reason is because the moon landing conspiracy can be summed up when someone goes, "What's the moon landing conspiracy?" Oh, we didn't land on a moon. Oh, okay. There's evidence for that? Oh, there's a ton of evidence. And then you can have this conversation about it. But how do you answer the question, what's QAnon? You're like, all right, so there's this guy. And he's been posting on the internet that this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And then Nancy Pelosi, no, there's this thing. And there was this pizza place, but it's not really a pizza place. And then maybe Jeffrey Epstein's involved. We're not really sure. There's definitely a thing with McAfee. And people are like, who the fuck is McAfee? Like, it's not going to work. QAnon went to 11 long time ago, and so it can't sustain itself because there's no it's not like a religion. There's no ritual to be like, and now we will pay to the Pizzagate incident. Like there's nothing to reaffirm all of the nonsense that's gone into QAnon.
Pizza Eucharist.
Yeah, right, dude. I would eat pizza. I would, if they started doing weekly pizza gatherings, you'd be screwed. Yeah, that's QAnon becomes a real religion, by the way, once they have weekly pizza gatherings. That's the most dangerous thing that can happen.
A Q pizza joint?
Dude, there's got to be one. There's no way that one of these dudes has not created his own pizza place and called it Pizzagate or Q.
Q pizza, pepperoni and Q.
Pepperoni. Dude, someone's got a Q pizza on the menu too. Someone's got it.
Definitely.
Come on, Reddit, don't fail us. This is
on that note,
someone's found it.
We're coming up on our time, so what would you say to? I guess I don't even know. What would you say to those who are leaving? I don't even know what question to end with. I'm baffled.
The question to end with is a question for everybody. Why, if you know that Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, not WhatsApp, I do set that aside, right? If you know that Facebook and Instagram are bad for you and they're not making you happy, why are you still doing it? And Twitter. Twitter's not a happy place.
And I think my prompt on top of that is write down your answer, put it in an envelope, and read it a week from now.
Yeah. And then the next week, turn off Facebook and see how many friends contact you. Or do what I did. Change your birthday on Facebook and see how many people actually message you on your birthday.
And then once people message you on your birthday, change it to the next day. I actually had
You guys are so devious.
I love
I had a
See if
friend
you
who-
get the
I had a
double
friend who did
messages.
I'll end with this. I had a friend who did this with ClassPass, and it's like anytime there's a tech company that gets venture financing, there's always like holes in their system. And for about a year, she just kept changing her birthday every week, and every week ClassPass would be like, "Oh my God, it's your birthday! Here's like a week of free classes," and she never paid.
Dude,
Yeah,
game the
free
system. I
classes all the
love
time.
it. Life hack
Yeah.
101. Dude,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah, I did. I changed my birthday to January 1st, and I got a bunch of people being like, "Oh, what? I didn't know you were born on New Year's." And I was like, yeah, okay, gotcha.
Switch into
So
live
very
streaming.
interesting bid says this is like a podcast, but better.
Oh, thank you.
Aw.
It is like a podcast. I've thought about trying to figure out how we could like record the audio, because the video is just the run.
We are
So-
recording the
Yeah.
audio.
We can get the audio. Yeah, that's not a problem. We do have video as well, in vertical and horizontal orientation.
Very cool. We could put it on is it Spotify. That's where all the cool kids go for podcasts these days. Anyway, maybe one day we will.
All right.
That's the idea. A podcast, but weirder.
What did someone call one of our other sessions was like a psychedelic NPR?
Yeah, that's what we
I
thought.
like
That's a
that.
good one.
I like that.
Like a psychedelic NPR. I think that was the time where we were talking about stuff. You know what we should do?
Midtown Manhattan
we should
says Facebook chicks. Am I right?
You don't want that, bro.
No, well,
You know,
my trolls are all talking about the. Did you say chicks? Did you say
Mhm.
chicks? Okay, yeah, they're talking about the chicks on Instagram. You know, that's what they're there for. Get the links.
No,
to
they're there for the-
their
Just,
Does
I
that-
saw a
does
guy
that
on
mean
a
chicks
bus
you-
the other day going through his Instagram, just a bunch of girls in bikini double tapping. And I was like, dude, is that your game? Is it just you're going for like quantity over quality? Like if
Yeah.
I keep liking these pictures, one
We
of these
talked about
days,
acid
this girl in a
with these
bikini is
guys.
gonna just show up at my house and be like, I saw you liking my Insta. Like, what are you doing? Like, there's a record of that. You're gonna have a wife or girlfriend. She's gonna find your phone and just be like, who are you liking all these pictures for? You know who you know this? Dude, you're just causing problems for yourself. It's not worth it. High risk, low reward. Get off of the Insta.
Brian Porter from LinkedIn says, "What about all the YouTubers that are basically holding sermon equivalents when Q comes out with a new prediction?"
That's the closest thing to a ritual I think
Pikachu.
that we could probably
Yeah,
find
when you
for
finally
Q.
do get a girlfriend,
The
what are you
issue,
gonna
right,
do?
is that in a large scale religion, typically there's like a hierarchy, right, where it comes from like a single person, and then that single person sends it in uniform down to like a middle group, and then those guys send it out to followers in unison, right? So there's a doctrinal check that the rituals have, right? And part of that you can see in like Christianity, for example.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, for example, in Christianity, in the hierarchy, it's not just that you meet and a pastor tells you something every week. The pastors also meet periodically in order to discuss aspects of the doctrine in order to make sure that they're all on board. When Q says something, Peter Griffin 69, there's going to be a guy who's going to be like, I am Peter Griffin 69.
I mean, I'll look it up to see if that person exists on Reddit right now.
Oh, there's no way he does not exist. So anyway, so Pastor Peter Griffin 69 basically gets onto YouTube, right? And he's like, "Oh, the new Q drop happened. Here's what's up." He says this, and this is what's going on. This fits into the conspiracy this way, and this fits into the conspiracy that way. And he does that, but he does not talk to Batman's penis XXX on YouTube, who is also got thousands of followers to discuss the next Q drop, because he's weaving his own thing.
Nina,
And there's
nice
these
to meet
general
you.
trends that happen, but each one of those guys is kind of like his own cult
You're
leader,
a Q
rather
follower,
than
aren't you,
Q
Pikachu?
being like its own cohesive doctrinal religion, right? He's like his own cult leader. So like comparing Peter Griffin 69 to Batman's penis XXX is kind of like comparing Jim Jones and the Pope, and you can decide which one is which. But the Pope has a hierarchy, and the Pope says to the cardinals, I have decreed this about the Lord, and they go to the bishops, and he has decreed this about the Lord, and they go to the local priests, and they decree that about the Lord. And then all of the Catholics throughout the world know that if you go into a church between this date and this date, you can be absolved of the sin of abortion, right?
Mm.
So you can change doctrine as well with that structure when the next Q drop from the Lord happens. And the Q drop versus the prophecy to the Pope is kind of funny to compare. But when the Q drop happens, it's not that Q talks to Peter Griffin 69 and then he, is one of like a panel that then gives it to his underlings and then give it to his underlings.
Yeah,
it kind of
really
just comes
hard
out and
for
everybody goes
the
nuts.
high-
Like the
high
network is flat
people of
for
power
Q.
to
It's
be
not
arrested.
hierarchical like it is in larger religions. Typically, if you have 1 million followers of a belief, you have a hierarchy that is set up. But when your organism is flat, it's not that it has the appearance of a hierarchy because everyone is following. But what that is that's just nodes in the network that are highly linked. That guy's not any more authoritative than just Joe Blow Van Snowman, who has like 2 followers on YouTube, right? So
is that authority conveyed? Like, is that largely understood as being this person has more or less authority than that person?
in a ritual, like in religious sense?
In the Q sense, like
In the Q
religion
sense.
has structure to doctrine,
Seems
but
to me it's
No,
based on
it's
charisma.
Yeah, it's pure
they
popularity
see me.
based. And I mean, it
Mm.
used to be,
They
like
hear me
Ron
too.
said,
I
charisma's
mute
part of
myself
it.
so I
That was a
can
lot
talk to
easier
y'all.
in face-to-face
But if I want
networks.
to talk
Like,
to them, I have a button to
like
unmute
entire,
myself.
like sociology,
so
like
they can hear
Max
me.
Weber wrote an entire thing where like cults are basically charismatic leadership.
Mm.
There is part of that online, right?
Midtown
But
Manhattan.
charismatic leadership is hard to convey when you're just a dude sitting in a room alone to a flock
Thank you.
that's on YouTube. It's difficult to do. It's a little awkward to do. But you do see that, right? Like the leaders of Q. There's no leader of Q. Like there's no leader of Antifa, right? The leader of Q, right? The guy that, or who they said was the leader of Q, the guy with like the face paint and like the giant buffalo horns and all that crap. Like
The
that guy's
QAnon
not
shaman.
the leader. Yeah, the QAnon shaman. He's not like the leader of Q. He's just some dipshit with a YouTube channel who
Yeah.
like has more people following him than anybody else. So he is popular, but he does not have authority over people. If he is like, look, guys, we're no longer viewing Q from this. Q must come from this 4chan thread only, and there cannot be another. Or if Q no longer starts it with this, then it no longer. Like if he does that, people are going to be like, "Yeah, screw you, you're not Q," because
Yeah.
he does not have the authority of Q. Typically, the way that we do that is you have to have a way of transferring socially the power of the on high to the people below. And in every religion across the world, that's done through real face-to-face rituals where the community comes together, the relevant community comes together, and they do a thing that has no natural consequence to what you're trying to do, right? And you all just believe that that is a transfer of power or a transfer of something special, like a baptism. Naturally, the connection is you've made a baby's head wet. But in the ideology, you didn't just make it wet. You've now absolved it of original sin and brought it into a community. Yeah.
Mm.
And when you ordain a priest, right, that's exactly what you're doing, right? When you ordain a priest, you are now saying this human has the power in certain ritual contexts to do the work of the on high, right? So you can marry people, you can divorce people in some cases, right? You have to have the marriage reversed religiously, right? You have to have that in Catholicism, right? You can get married, but a divorce, that's illegal. You have to go backward. You have to get an annulment of your marriage. To make other priests, you have to have a priest do that. But you have to have a special priest who do that. Not just any old priest can make a new priest. So there's this, and we have this tacit belief, and we've shown that we just do this naturally. We just kind of evolved these systems in order to know when a ritual worked to transfer the power or essence of a god. Q has no ritual for that, and Q largely will never really have a tangible ritual for that because it's based almost exclusively on online communities. It's the same reason why transhumanism is not as much of a religion as it is like a new age cult. There's not that many transhumanist churches where people are doing transhumanist rituals and creating transhumanist priests. You just have thought leadership.
Gotta have rituals. You gotta have a hierarchy of some kind.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of defining religion by ritual either. It's actually, it serves a functional purpose in religions that are based in evolutionary psychology, that without which we've never seen social constructions of that kind be successful without it. It seems like it's necessary.
Hmm.
So I hope
Alright.
that answers his question about Q on YouTube.
Yeah, I think that did. Part of me wants to ask another question, but I'm like so tired that I think I'm just gonna hold it for next week or 2
Okay.
weeks from now when we go again.
It's not a 2-minute question.
No, it's a long. It's a short question. It's a very short question, but it's going to be a 2-hour answer about how to create rituals that thus create religion.
Oh wait,
So-
have a computer model on that.
Yeah, we do. We've actually done a computer model and like
Okay,
an AI
so for
on that.
next session, 2 weeks from today, we will be talking about how to create rituals that thus create religion and using
How to create a
that
religion.
power and understanding for good.
I hope we can come back to psychedelics at some point too.
I was gonna say we should do one on mushrooms because I watched that documentary on Netflix about mushrooms. And
Which
it
one?
was
Entangled
awesome.
Entangled Life or Fantastic Fungi?
Fantastic fungi.
Yeah, that one's good. Okay, so mushrooms and religion. Got it.
Wait, isn't that what we say we're going to talk about every week?
Well, it's
No,
funny,
we never
right?
say that we're going
Like,
to talk about it, but we always
but we always get around to it. Yeah, but like the communication patterns of mycelium, like I saw that and I had to pause it and walk away from the Netflix documentary at like 9:30 p.m. I was like, wait,
Yeah,
what?
yeah. Isn't that fascinating?
Welcome
Yeah.
to the Wood Wide Web.
That's right. I love that line too. That was wild. And like living now in a culture where like mushrooms are a big part of the culture actually, and like going out and finding mushrooms, teaching your kids which mushrooms are safe to eat and which ones aren't, and like be like any person, if you just like kind of pull them in the woods in Slovakia, they can identify every mushroom, what it tastes, how they cook it, like all this stuff. It's wild to see that that's like happening in the U.S. now too. It's very weird.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've only now started my training in mushroom picking.
Oh,
found-
it's fun.
I found 7 mushrooms. My
You can
first
eat any.
hunting.
You can eat any mushroom. Some only once.
Yeah, right. I love that. I love that. That's what I told my mother-in-law, and she thought that was funny. They have a similar saying in Slovak.
All right. I'm gonna end the stream, and we will be back 2 weeks from today to talk about how to create a religion and everything mushroom and mycelium
Wait,
and
I'm like
psychedelics.
really surprised that a computer scientist like didn't already like I would have thought that like people managing data and movement of data would have already like been studying mushroom like mycelial networks.
Dude, you'd think so, right?
Yeah,
Like it's such a perfect thing to do. It's really only started in the last few years, and it's really niche like stuff that sits in the background of
Streaming
papers
people.
and
The hippy
streaming
dippy
people.
the hippy dippy scientist, yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I messed
That
up your
would be
stream,
fun.
Brian. I'm sorry.
No,
I just
No,
wanted to ask
mycelia, state space, possibility state space of computational models and mycelium networks.
Yeah. It's interesting too because there's like a link between mycelium structures and how they solve mazes and quantum computing systems as well. That's really cool.
that.
I highly recommend the mushroom porn subreddit.
Mushroom porn?
Yeah.
You always come with these subreddits. Am I gonna regret that?
I'm
Mushroom
gonna
porn.
regret.
No. Elephant, pink elephants was
Is this
lazy.
gonna be okay to
We're
have in
gonna
my
talk
browser
about
history?
Mushrooms.
Yes. Ish.
Oh, whoa, that's really cool.
Mushrooms are shrooms.
Whoa, I have one that I'm gonna put up here. Oh shit, that's got spikes in
Alright,
it. No,
stop
watch
the
out.
stream.
Yep, this is.
How many?
That's one you can
there,
eliminate orange.
but they